All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm Mary Lynn Maloney with the Orland Park Public Library. Thanks for joining us for this program called Dementia, Understanding Brain Basics. This is the first in our year-long series on dementia awareness in support of the Dementia Friendly Orland Park initiative. I'd like to welcome our speaker, Aishling Dalton Kelly, CEO of Aishling Companion Home Care. Aishling is a certified dementia practitioner, and her agency offers a variety of dementia education classes for the public, for caregivers, for first responders, and healthcare professionals. And just a quick note before we begin, if you have questions during the presentation, you may put them in the Q&A box or the chat, and then we can ask Aishling to address them at the end of the presentation. So welcome, Aishling, and I will now turn the program over to you.
Great, thank you, Mary Lynn. Well, good evening, everybody, and happy Friday. As Mary Lynn said, my name is Aishling Dalton Kelly, and I'm going to be your presenter this evening on the topic of understanding the brain and the brain basics. So as Mary Lynn had said, for those who don't know, that Orland Park is now part of the Dementia Friendly Orland Park. It's an initiative and part of a bigger movement called Dementia Friendly America. We have just gained status of that a couple of months ago. And one of the commitments that we have made with the library being a part of this endeavor is to get the good word out and information, and most importantly, education to the families who are struggling with a loved one with the form of dementia. And I'll go into some statistics at the end of this presentation and some numbers that you may not be aware of to kind of bring you up to speed of where we're at with dementia and what's happening around the world and here in America. But for anybody that would like to do a little bit of research themselves, feel free to go to dfamerica.org. That's D as in dog, F as in Frank, and the word America.org. And you can go on there at your leisure and listen to some of the stories and possibly become a dementia friend and a champion that will help us here in Orland Park to help our families. So you might say, well, why are you speaking tonight on understanding the brain and the brain basics relative to dementia? So this is one of a series of educational events that we're going to be offering to families who need this education in their journey with a loved one with dementia. And for those who don't know me, my presentation style is very casual. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nurse, I'm simply the daughter whose mother had dementia, and I'm going to share with you all the things that I never knew, the things I never thought to ask, the things I didn't understand. As a daughter, 12 years ago, I just accepted that my mother had dementia and in essence thought that she lost her mind. And in one sense she did, which was quite ignorant of me just to think that she was demented, so to speak. And that began my journey to where my love of dementia really and my educational inquisitiveness started, because I wanted to understand exactly what happened to my mother, because she looked the same, she just didn't behave the same, and clearly there was many things that she didn't know. So one of the things that's going to be helpful to you by the end of this presentation tonight is that you'll be able to understand what's going on in your loved one's brain that has dementia, which will help you better understand maybe their behaviors or their lack of communication, and sometimes some of the things that they do. I'll give you an example to put this into perspective. I hear from many family members who say that my dad keeps asking me the same question over and over again, and it's really frustrating me and he's stressing me out. Well, the reason it stresses a person out is because they don't understand why their father is asking the same question over and over again. And there's a reason for that. And when you know that reason, you will be more patient because you'll know how to respond. One other example I'll share with you that's useful is you'll be able to understand the mechanisms of what's disappearing basically in the brain over time. And dementia is a long journey for a lot of families, and we decided that we would start with this understanding of brain basics because this is where the whole journey starts for you as the family member or the relative that is possibly taking care of your family member with dementia. So it's very important that by the end of our presentation today, you understand the basics at a level of a family member. You don't need to be a doctor or a nurse. You do not need to have a medical degree. I myself am a visual learner, so I learn by pictures. And we're going to talk a little bit about this as we move through the presentation, because for me, it's important that my students understand the basics of what I'm trying to teach them as quickly as possible without getting overwhelmed. So I'm not a fan of big bullet points, death by PowerPoint, most especially in this COVID situation. Everybody is zoomed out, so to speak. So I've put in a lot of very colorful diagrams tonight that will really spell it out for you, and I want to keep it as simple as possible. Now, at the end, if we have time for questions, I am more than happy to answer any question that there are. If there's a question that I cannot answer, I will certainly get you that answer. I'm an expert in some fields, in a lot of things, but again, I say I'm not a doctor or a nurse. So I promise that I will get you the most correct answer if I cannot answer it for you. And we will put my telephone number, and Mary Lynn at the library is going to put her email at the end so that if there isn't time for questions, you can certainly email them to her. So let's just throw out a quick survey to those that are listening, and you can answer this quietly to yourself. Do you actually understand, or do you know the different compartments that make your brain work? Have a little think about that. Do you understand the right and left brain connection? Do you understand how a simple message travels in the brain? Do you understand how memories are stored and where they're put and where they're retrieved? Do you understand that water is vital to the successful functioning of your brain? And do you understand, or do you know what a toxin is? And I want you to think about that as we move now into our first slide, because all of these things are very relative to a person who is going down, we'll say, the road of dementia. So our objectives is for you at the end of this presentation to be able to identify just the principal areas in the brain and what their purposes are. And I want you to know how these areas relate to each other, and simply knowing the importance of the brain. So all of us know that from conception to birth, everything starts to form. So if you look at this little baby's head here, a newborn baby's brain weighs about 400 grams. Now, I'm from Ireland, so we grew up in ounces and pounds. So if there's anybody listening, 400 grams is basically 0.88 pounds, which is almost 1 pound, which is very, very small. And then the average brain size was 20 cubic inches and 34 cubic inches at 90 days. If you look at this picture here, you'll see that basically from the age of 0 to a 2-year-old, the brain grows at a very rapid rate. And in essence, by the age of 2, their brain is formed to about 80% of its adult size. And this makes sense if you ever listen to parents who say that their toddlers are super intelligent. They're watching mom and dad, they're listening, and they're really, really fast at figuring things out, right? The terrible twos, opening those closets and opening all those drawers in the kitchen. They've been watching and observing because their brain, in essence, from 0 to 2 is just like a sponge, and it takes in absolutely everything that's going on. So one of the things that I find most interesting, most specifically in my own journey, is that I never really thought about the brain. I mean, I didn't. I just accepted that it was like a computer base that ran my body, but I never really understood all the different compartments and how it worked. Most people, when you think about body organs, think about your heart or your liver. So few people think about your brain. So our brain is one of the largest and most complex organs in our human body. It is like a super powered computer. And I could speak for a month and still you wouldn't be able to understand the magnitude and the power of our brain. It truly is a working miracle. It is made up of more than 100 billion nerves that communicate in trillions of connections that are called synapses. Now, I want you to take a little look at this picture here. And again, quietly to yourself, I want you to observe this brain. What do you see in this brain? What do you notice? Look at the colors. Look at the clear mesh fascia that's covering the top of the brain. That's what a healthy brain is supposed to look like. Now this, on the other hand, is not only an unhealthy brain, it is the brain of a person who had a form of dementia. And I want you to look at this brain and think of all the different things in this picture versus the one that we just saw. So if you look at the unhealthy brain, you can see the color is different. You can see that there's massive gaps, and I believe that you can see that the fascia and connective tissue is broken. Now, if I put the two brains there together for you, obviously both of these brains are soaking in some sort of formaldehyde to preserve them while they continue to work on them. But when you look at the cross comparison, what I really want you to focus in is look at the shrinkage of the brain on the right. And then I want you to focus in on the big gaps that you see all around the Alzheimer's brain. It looks smaller, of course, it's a different color, and there are big significant gaps around the top and around the side. So look at the two differences and take note, because now you know what a normal brain should look like and what an unhealthy Alzheimer's brain looks like. Now, at the beginning of the presentation, I asked you to think about toxins, and I asked you, did you know what a toxin is? I want you to think about where all the toxins enter our body and how they enter our body. Or do you even know what a toxin is? So this is what a toxin looks like underneath the microscope. And this is going to be very important that you understand what toxins are as we move through this presentation, because we're going to talk about brain health in a little bit, and toxins are a very big part of that. So this is basically the upper and the lower compartments of the brain. The green area is called the neocortex, and then directly underneath that is what's called the subcortex. Now, before I tell you what each part does, I want to share with you that there are two very broad terms for dementia, and dementia can be split into these two categories. In other words, it can be a cortical dementia or it can be a subcortical dementia. So the cortica, which is the very top part there, is the cerebral cortex, and that plays a role in your attention, your perception, your awareness, all of your thought processing, your memory, which is super important. You'll see that it is highlighted and bolded, and I'll explain why in a few minutes. Your language and your consciousness. So in a cortical dementia, it affects obviously the cerebral cortex and the outer layers of the brain. This part of the brain plays a critical role in all of your thinking abilities, and it is very much correlated to your memory and language. So when a person has Alzheimer's, as in the definitive Alzheimer's disease, it is a cortical dementia. This is where Alzheimer's dementia comes from. And it affects the upper part of the brain, which is the neocortex. Underneath that green part is the white part in the diagram, and that is called the subcortex, which consists of three main divisions. We've got the basal ganglia, which lies in each hemisphere and is involved in motor controls and learning skills. Now, if you had a subcortical dementia, Parkinson's might be familiar to some people. Parkinson's disease is a form of a subcortical dementia. In addition, when we think of the brain as a whole, it has three main parts, and that is the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brain stem. So the cerebellum contains the major lobes of the brain and is responsible for receiving, giving, and meaning to information from the sensory organs. The cerebellum, if you look at the diagram down on the left, sits underneath the cerebrum. It's kind of tucked away at the back. And the cerebellum kind of stands for a little brain. As you see from the diagram, it's not even a third of the size of the brain. It's less, much smaller than the cerebrum. And the cerebellum is a structure of the central nervous system. So that also has a very important role in all of your motor skills. And then you have underneath that, you have the brain stem, which is, or the spinal cord brain stem, which is very, very well protected at the back of your neck. And the brain stem functions include the regulation of your heart rate, all of your breathing, which we all just take for granted every day, inhaling and exhaling, the sleeping and the eating. So all very, very, very important functions. Now, as part of the cerebrum, we have all of the lobes. And these lobes may not mean a lot to a lot of people, but when we advance with the second and third presentation from the library series, we're going to take a deeper dive into the different types of dementias. And these lobes that we're talking about today will mean a lot more then. But if you look at the frontal lobe, it is the part of the brain that controls important cognitive skills in humans. Then you have the parietal lobe is responsible for integration of sensory information, including your touch, your temperature, your pressure, and your pain. So that part of the brain tells you if you're too hot, if you're too cold, that you're sensitive to touch, pain, and pressure. That's part of the brain controls all of that. Some of you may have heard of a dementia called frontal temporal dementia. That's just one of the dementias that basically comes out of this parietal frontal temporal lobe. So then we have the temporal lobes, and they are mostly common associated with processing auditory information and with the encoding of memory. We're going to talk a little bit about the encoding of memory here in a few minutes. And then you have the occipital lobe, which is the part of the brain responsible for all of the information that your eyes take in every single day. And then that part of the brain is responsible for turning what your eyes see visually into words as persons see it. Now, one of the premium areas of your brain that is affected or dies off first is the hippocampus. And you wouldn't have seen the hippocampus on the other diagrams that I showed you because it's literally embedded deep in the temporal lobe. So this is like a side view, a sliced view so that you can see it. And it has a major role in learning and memory. And sadly, it is the first part of your brain to die off when a person has form of dementia. It's the area that's affected most, and it holds most of your long-term memories. So now, if you were to literally look over somebody's skull, you could basically divide it into two hemispheres. Hemispheres meaning halves. And you have basically a right side and you have a left side. What I'm showing you here is the brain lateralization. And if you look on the right, you'll see that the right side of the brain is responsible for perception, sequencing, creativity, writing and art, imagination. The right side of the brain actually controls the left side of the body. And then on the left side of the brain, it is responsible for controlling everything on the right side of the body. Now, why is this important? So it depends which side of your brain is most efficient, really determines your personality and the type of person that you are. For example, I hate math. I was never any good at math in school. I don't think I'm still very good at math, and I have no time for math, okay? So I know just by that alone that I'm more efficient with the right side of my brain. How do I know that? Because on the right side, you will see that people who are very creative and very imaginative are more right brain efficient, and that would be me, so to speak. Now, I want you to think about, are you more right brain efficient or are you more left brain efficient? So let's just say accountants or people who do mathematics. They're usually more left brain efficient. They're usually very logical people. They're very analytical. They're very astute. They're driven by data and metrics. That's not me. Okay, so for those of you that love math and figuring out puzzles, you're probably more left brain efficient than you are right. On the right side, you can be a subjective person, an intuitive, imaginative. You could be a very innovative, forward thinker, a visionary, so to speak. They're usually the people that are more efficient with the right side of the brain. Now, why does that matter in what we're doing today? Well, it matters a lot, and I'll tell you why. One of the things that we're severely lacking in our healthcare system is how we treat people with dementia. And one of the things I'm going to teach you as we move through these courses is that people with dementia never lose how they feel and how they sense people, right? One of the other important things is that you need to understand the person, their habits, their personality, and what they like to do, because their activities are things that you're going to be doing with them because they still have to function every single day. So if you had, we'll say, somebody who was a former accountant, did taxes and numbers for years, that person would not be happy with you doing some sort of a craft with him, okay? You would have to gear what you're doing in your activities to be mathematical in some form or nature, some sort of puzzles, because that's what his brain is used to, that's what his personality was, and that's where you're going to get the most pleasure and enjoyment out of the person that has dementia, because you know that they were more left brain efficient. The same is true of a person on the right. Usually right brain folks are very good with sewing, crocheting, knitting. They like to color, they like arts, music. So again, knowing their personality and knowing which side of their brain was more efficient will kind of tell you the type of person that they were, which will help you in your activities as you try to appease them and entertain them as you move through the journey of dementia. So now if we were to literally split that last picture here in half, this is what it would look like. And you'll see here, the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body. It also performs tasks that have to do with logic, such as science and math, which we already talked about. And the right hemisphere coordinates the left side of the body and performs the tasks that have to do with creativity and arts. Now, sometimes for those that are in my age group, certainly I'm just slightly over 50. And my mother growing up always told me that if something didn't feel right, it's not right. Okay, so call it women's intuition, call it men's intuition, it's your gut, right? My mother always said, forget your heart, forget your brain, what does your gut tell you? And people were very smart back in the day, and they're still smart today, because in actual fact, many people say that your gut is your second brain. And here's why. Your brain basically talks to your gastrointestinal tract and vice versa. So for example, if you did have a troubled intestine, your intestine can send signals to the brain, just as a troubled brain can send those signals to the gut, right? Let's put this into perspective. If you were at home alone by yourself and you thought that you heard somebody in the house and it's dark, straight away your brain goes into a fight or flight mode, and all of a sudden you feel sick in your stomach because you think there's an intruder in your house. Okay, so that doesn't happen by magic. That happens because of the gut-brain connection. So a person's stomach or their intestinal distress can be the cause of a product of anxiety, stress, or depression. So now let's put that into perspective. When you are anxious in your gut all the time, we'll say butterflies and just that nauseous feeling, that can, intense anxiety and stress that you're undergoing can turn into depression. And that's because the brain and the GI system, known as the gastrointestinal system, are absolutely very intimately connected. So I had said to you at the beginning, we're going to do a lot of talking tonight about water. Drinking water does increase the brain's temperature, and it gets rid of the toxins and the dead cells. And we're going to talk a little bit about the toxins and where they come from and how important water is, because water can carry those toxins out of your brain, out of your body, and eliminate them. So that's what's really important when you understand everything we eat and everything we drink. So water keeps the cells active. It also keeps the chemicals balanced, and it also helps regulate stress and anxiety. We're going to talk a little bit later on towards the end about brain health. That's a huge topic out there today. Again, I didn't know what brain health was because I really didn't understand about the brain in general. I do understand it now, but same thing, eating high quality food that contains lots of vitamins and minerals and antioxidants nourishes the brain. Some people say, is it true that what you put in your gut feeds your brain? And the answer is yes, it does. So you need to think long and hard about what you're putting in your mouth, because if there's toxins in the food, it goes into your brain, and guess what? Your brain cannot process those toxins because it's not natural and it doesn't know what to do with it. So in essence, it can cause damage. So now let's talk about a thought. How does a thought even travel in your brain, right? So your brain is full of neurons, and neurons release brain chemicals. Basically, these chemicals are known as neurotransmitters, and they generate electrical signals in other neighboring neurons in your brain. These electrical signals propagate like a wave of thousands of neurons, which lead to a thought formation. One theory explains that thoughts are generated when neurons fire. So I want you to think about any time that your car basically died and you had to get jumper cables to start your car. You'll always hear people say, do not let the positive touch the negative, right? Because if that happens, what happens? They spark. So the visual that I'm trying to give you here is that when your two synapses meet, in the middle is that neurotransmitter, and they kind of fire and they spark, and that generates messages and signals. Now, sadly, in Alzheimer's or dementia, there is a decrease in your brain chemicals. And one of the most important brain chemicals is called acetylcholine. And when that neurotransmitter is damaged, the bridge of communication between each of the nerve cells dies off. And in essence, that's the start of I suppose, the mess, so to speak, in your brain where signals cannot get through. So there is a picture of what an actual neuron looks like. And I want you to focus in the red kind of center in the middle. The neurons are the basic working unit of every single human brain. A special cell designed to transmit information to other nerve cells, muscles, or glands. Every single brain has approximately, and it's only an approximate, 86 billion neurons. I mean, that's an unbelievable number of neurons. So here's our synapse that I explained to you about. They kind of look like Hershey's Kisses upside down. And then those white bubbly things in the middle in the picture, that's where the messages are being transmitted. They're firing, so to speak. The synapse or the gap is the place where this information is transmitted from one neuron to another. Synapses usually form between axon terminals and dendrite spines. There's not necessarily a universal rule. There are also axon to axon, dendrite to dendrite, and axon to cell body synapses. Now, that's a lot of information. It's a lot of very chemical and very medical information. You don't need to worry about that. All you need to think about when we're talking about messages not getting through is the picture that you see here. And then I'm going to show you in another slide here in a few minutes. When the transmitters in the middle don't fire, then obviously the message can't jump from one of those Hershey Kisses-like shape into the other one. And basically the messages can't get through, and that's what happens with somebody with the form of dementia. So communication of chemical synapses require the release of neurotransmitters. And when that presynaptic membrane is depolarized, remember I told you there's the negative and the positive, the calcium entry causes synaptic vessels to fuse with the membrane and release neurotransmitters molecules into the synaptic cleft. Now, I'm not going to read through any further of that because it is very detailed and, like I said, chemical. I just want you to think about the picture that I shared with you and how the messages get from one to other. And that's really all that you need to know. So here's a fabulous diagram of how the signals travel from that neuron cell body. Remember I said to you to focus in on that red center that I showed you a couple of slides back. So that's called the cell body. And the signals travel via that positive charge, right? Within the neuron, and they travel via chemical transmission between the neurons. And when the electrical impulse from the axon potentially reaches the end of the axon, it signals the terminal button to release neurotransmitters into the synapse. So that's basically just a little diagram of what one of those tiny little neurons look like. It's almost like an octopus with a center, and then a snake that's joined to the octopus, and then it has like branches coming out on the end. Now, that is what's known as the neuron forest. So when I said to you there was 86 billion neurons, that's what it looks like in the brain. And it's a very unusual picture to look at when you think about what's inside in your head, but that's the basically the upper part of your brain and how all the messages and the signals are sent for every single thing that we do. So now what's a thought and what's a feeling? because we need to be able to understand how our thoughts are processed and how our feelings are processed. And these come back to the lobes and stuff that we talked about in the beginning. So a thought is usually an idea that you just think of. It just might occur suddenly in the mind, the action or process of thinking. A feeling is an emotional state or a reaction. It's a belief, especially a vague or irrational one. Thoughts and emotions have a profound effect on one another. Your thoughts can actually trigger emotions. For example, worrying about an upcoming job interview may cause fear and anxiety, and also serve as an appraisal of the emotion. So now let's think about this. When you have a thought and it is perceived through your eyes and your ears and through everything that you're scanning every minute of every day, millions and millions of pieces of information are being scanned through your eyes. And then what you see is transmitted in your brain, and it goes into one of two places. It goes into your long-term memory bank or your short-term memory bank. And I put those filing cabinets there for you because really that's what your brain is doing. And I'll share a little tip with you for some people who think they have bad memories. They may meet somebody at a meeting today, and the next day they might meet that person. They might recognize the person's face, but they don't remember their name. That doesn't mean that you have dementia. What I will share with you is when you go to bed at nighttime and you sleep, your brain goes back through every single second throughout the day, literally in a nanosecond over the 8 hours that you're sleeping. And it decides based on your feeling of how you encounter that person, if you think that information is worth saving or not. So if we didn't remember somebody's name, it's probably that you didn't like them. That was the feeling that you got, or you felt they were insignificant, in which case your brain did not store that memory in long-term filing for you to retrieve again. So just a little fun fact for you. So now look at this picture here, and I love this picture because it speaks volumes. It is basically puzzle pieces of a person's brain, but there's a piece missing, right? So this really is what's happening when a person has dementia. And I want you to really focus on this diagram, because just because one piece of the puzzle is missing does not mean that the other pieces don't connect. Just as you see here in this picture, they do. What I'm trying to explain here is that when somebody has a form of dementia, there's still lots of things they can do, but many times we focus on all the things that they can't do. When a person develops dementia, it doesn't happen in 24 hours. It doesn't happen over a year. It happens years before it ever surfaces. And what our neurologists are looking for in the brain is what you see on the screen there. They're called plaques and they're called tangles. And plaques and tangles eventually start to join together and they become clumps. And when those clumps come together, they die off. And that causes the information from getting from one side to the other. It's almost like there's a barrier in the middle. Remember what I said about the normal brain and the Alzheimer's brain? So with those plaques and tangles, the reason there's gaps in that right-hand brain is because the plaques and tangles are so vast, they join together and the communication part dies off, okay? Here's a visual for you. Look at this rope and imagine if you were to take one end of this rope and give the other end to your friend, right? It's straight, it's unwriggled, it's perfect, untangled. That's just the way you want a rope to be. Then there's a knot in the rope, right? Well, that's going to cause a problem because you can't really use the rope for 100% of what you want it to use it for because there's a knot in it. And then it gets another knot in it, and then it gets another knot in it, right? This is exactly what is happening in your brain with the plaques and the tangles. And eventually these knots all become one because so many of them form. And that is what happens with plaques and tangles. And that's why your brain cells start to die off, which is why a person loses the ability to speak or to remember the word, or they may open their mouth and the wrong word comes out. Now, I put this diagram in here because this is powerful. Again, we do a wonderful job of taking care of people with dementia, but sadly, we write them off insofar as that we think they can't do anything. So if you look at this young lady here, she's broken her ankle and half of her leg is in cast, but guess what? Her other leg works, her arms work, her ears, her eyes, everything else is working. You don't look at her and say, oh, she's no good because she's broken her ankle, right? But sadly, some of the stigma that's out there with a person who has dementia, society just writes them off and says, well, they're demented. I don't know how to talk to them, so I just won't bother because they can't speak. So that means they're no good at anything. That is not the visual that I want you to leave with tonight, because some parts of their brain is broken, but not all of their brain is broken. And when we talked about sensing and feeling, a person with dementia never loses the ability to feel embarrassed or to feel cold or to feel hot or to feel loved. So the dementia never takes that piece away. It might take away their function, but it does not take away how they feel as a person. So if you're talking to somebody with dementia and you're talking to them like a baby, you're going to make them feel inadequate. And if you're snapping back at them saying, Mom, you've asked me that 50 times already, and your tone of voice is not nice, they sense that. They never lose that in their journey with dementia. So now let's talk about 7 ways that we can keep our brain healthy. All the doctors tell you that you should be exercising, at minimum 3 times a week, certainly for 30 minutes each day. It is very important to do aerobic exercises to keep your heart pumping that blood, and then your blood is fed into your brain and oxygenated, getting fresh air, and everything is good. Building muscle is equally important, coupled with strength training. At least 2 times a week has been shown to improve heart health, and heart health is very, very important. We talked a little bit earlier about eating a healthy diet, and diet is very, very important. Today, when you go out to restaurants, there's so few restaurants that will offer you vegetable, never mind 3 servings of vegetable on your plate. People think that fries are a vegetable. Yes, they are a potato. However, they're a starchy, white, sweet, sugary vegetable, and we need to see more of the greens and the oranges. We need to see more of the lentils and the grains and the wheat and the fiber. They say that all of this is missing in our diet today, and sadly it is. And remember what I said earlier, that everything you put in your mouth does have toxins, and that's going into your brain, and your brain is not able to process it. So in essence, what we eat could be detrimental to causing diseases if we're not watching what we're putting in our mouth. The other thing that there's significant research on is stress, how stressed everybody is. And when you're stressed, you're anxious, and it definitely does take a toll on your mental health. And it can also affect your physical health. And, when your physical health is affected, so too is your brain health. Yesterday, I listened to a podcast in regards to how detrimental it is to having 8 hours of sleep a day. Americans are the leaders in the world for being the most unhealthy sleepers, where people are not getting 8 hours of sleep a night. And people might say, I only need 4 hours, I only need 6 hours. Every single person needs 8 hours of sleep at night. And I want you to remember what I said to you about those 2 filing cabinets. Think about how hard your brain works throughout the day, just making you inhale and exhale every second of the day, in addition to everything else that you do. in your office, in your work, in your home. Your brain is doing all of that work every single day, and you can't run a car without, replenishing it with oil and having it tuned up and the tires changed and all of that other good stuff to make your car run smoothly. It's called maintenance, and we need to be able to have a proper night's sleep in order to maintain our brain health. The other thing is that when you do sleep at nighttime, many parts of your brain do shut down and they rest while the other part is working, and they take turns in switching off, so to speak, so that when you wake up the next morning, you're ready to go. So sleep is very, very important, and it's most important for when throughout the day you're scanning all of that information and you decide, are you keeping it or are you discarding it? Is it going into your long-term memory or is it going into your short-term memory? Is it worth keeping or is it not? That takes a lot of energy on your brain's part. So feeding your brain and resting is super important. In order to remain cognitively active, it's very important that you exercise your brain. So the question that I'll ask to those that are listening tonight is, how many of us exercise our brain? We exercise our legs and our arms, we exercise our heart, but actually how many of us exercise your brain? Now, you've heard the expression, if you don't use it, you lose it. And I am telling you that is 100% true. You should be challenging yourself every single day. You should be doing something that you're unfamiliar with, and that will exercise your brain. Doing Sudoku puzzles every day and crossword puzzles every day, no, that does not exercise your brain. That's just keeping your brain active. One of the ways to encourage your brain to grow, so to speak, is to listen to classical music. You can play table tennis, you can learn music, or they say learning a language. Now, none of us have time to do all of those on a daily basis, but the point I'm trying to make is you shouldn't just be doing routine stuff. Even cooking a new recipe or shopping for the recipe, weighing the vegetables, weighing the meat, counting the calories, all of that stuff. If that's not something you do, that is exercising your brain because it's something new. And one of the last things that's really important is to watch your blood pressure. So many diseases are caused because of high blood pressure. And when you have high blood pressure, it causes extreme stress on your heart, causes inflammation, and there is significant research out there showing that inflammation is one of the underlying causes of dementia. So here we have a picture of a brain with the water. I just want to share with you that on average, every day, we should be drinking a certain amount of water. About 15.5 cups for our men and about 11.5 cups for our ladies. I'm not sure who's on this call, but I'm going to be very transparent and tell you that if I drink 3 cups of water a week, I'm lucky. And that was actually one of my New Year's resolutions, is that every morning I get up, I'm having a pint of water, I'm having a pint of water midday, and I'm having a pint of water after my dinner. And if I can keep those 3 things up front in my mind every day, then I'm doing a good job, at least a better job than I was doing before. So let's summarize what we've done. The brain has 3 main parts: the cerebrum, cerebellum, and the brainstem. Cerebrum is the largest part of the brain. It's composed of the right and the left hemispheres, the 2 halves that we talked about, and it performs all the higher functions like touch, vision, hearing, as well as speech, your reasoning, emotions, all of your learning, and it controls all of your fine movement. Then the brain controls our thoughts, our memory, and our speech, the movement of your arms and legs, and the function of many organs within our body. Then you have the central nervous system, and that's composed of the brain and the spinal cord. A thought is an idea or an opinion produced by thinking, occurring suddenly in the mind, while a feeling is an emotional state or a reaction, and usually that state is from what you see or what you perceive. We know that the left side of the brain is responsible for controlling the right side of the body, while the right side of the hemisphere coordinates the left side of the body. And we know that a newborn's brain size is about 400 grams, which equals 0.88 pounds, almost 1 pound. And we know that most of the growth, 80% of it, happens between the age of 0 and 2 years of age. As I'd said to you when we started here this evening, we very much underestimate the miracle that our brains are and all it is capable of. It is absolutely an amazing organ, but it does need to be exercised. It does need to be taken care of. It most certainly is an amazing complex system whose mysteries are becoming increasingly accessible to tools of modern science. And it is so important as we move to the next session in our dementia presentations that you understand just the basics of what we've done here tonight. And it's important that you understand how important your diet is to preventing future diseases. Just before we take any questions, I would just like to tell you that the next presentation is Friday, the 22nd at 7 o'clock. And we're going to be talking a little bit more specifically about dementia. And for those listening that aren't really sure what dementia is, you know, dementia is a loss of your mental functioning that causes major deficits, not just in your memory and your language, but your learning ability and your judgment and your orientation. There are very specific diseases that cause dementia, and among them is Alzheimer's disease. And Alzheimer's disease is just one of a potential 400 different types of dementia. However, Alzheimer's dementia carries about 65% of most diagnoses. We in the States today have almost 6 million Americans affected by dementia. Sadly, somebody develops dementia every 63 seconds and 3 seconds globally. Alzheimer's is the 6th leading cause of death here in the US. If you couple prostate cancer and breast cancer together, Alzheimer's beats them out. In other words, there's more diagnosis of people with dementia than there is with both of those diseases together. And currently we are spending about $290 billion a year in annual costs. There's about 10 million new dementia cases each year and about 50 million globally. And we are on track for those numbers to triple by 2050. So it's very important as we move through our dementia-friendly Orland Park endeavors and we move through these educational events with the library, that we educate the community and we power our families basically with the resources for them to be able to take care of their loved one, because we'll talk next week about some more statistics. It's usually a family member or a spouse who takes care of the other spouse that has this form of dementia. And hard enough as it is to take care of somebody, you definitely need to understand the tips and the tools of the trade, so to speak, that are going to help you navigate the journey, because it is a long journey and it's a hard journey. So I'm not sure if we have any questions. Perhaps if there are, I'm happy to answer them. You can come on screen or on audio, Mary Lynn, and let me know if there's any questions from anybody that I can answer.
Certainly. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and put my email in the chat box right now.
Okay.
And if anyone is thinking about questions, we have one here from Jackie.
Okay.
At some point, will you cover if there are treatments and or medications that help to heal or reverse some of these faulty connections?
Okay, so I will absolutely, Jackie, cover that. We go into that a little bit in depth next week. I don't want to ruin your weekend in telling you that no, there is no medication to stop dementia, and there is no medication to slow it down. We just have to deal with what we have to deal with, and we try to fix all of the other situations, like maybe depression or some of the other issues, and we medicate those. But no, there is no medication currently that works to cure dementia. I will share with you as we move through these presentations, there certainly are other things that are happening out there. Like, for example, there's a world famous neurologist called Dr. Daniel Amen, like the prayer, Amen. And he has done amazing work. He's big on the brain health. He even says it can prevent Alzheimer's and dementia. It's all correlated to what we're putting in our mouths. And he also talks about hyperbaric chambers, which is being used around America. The influx of oxygen is really helping a lot of people. And then I will also go into some of the other trials and things that they're working on, and I'll bring you as many of those updates as I have. And that will happen. Some of that information will be next week, and then I'll have more statistics as we move into the third presentation. We another question?
Any other questions?
I'm seeing one in the Q&A, Mary Lynn,
Thank
rather
you.
than the chat.
Yep. Aha, Victor wants to know, as you age and are becoming more forgetful, is that a sign of an onset or just getting older?
So no, Victor, it doesn't mean that you have dementia. We'll talk a little bit about that next week too. We'll talk about normal aging versus that of things that you need to be concerned about, basically the warning signs. I don't know, Victor, what age you are. Again, I'll share with you, I'm 53. I lose my keys on my phone every day. Do I think I have dementia? I know I don't have dementia. But what I do know is that I'm very busy and my brain is overstimulated, and I'm probably not getting enough sleep and rest to where I need to maybe slow down a little bit. I'll also share with you, Victor, that there is great memory books that you can purchase. There are great brain games that you can play online, and I'll put those in the presentation for next week so that you can do them. And that really does help you with your memory. So no, don't worry if you're losing things or you're forgetting things that you have dementia. There's lots of other things that come into play as well. We can talk about that next week.
Okay, Aishling, there's a question from Terry. Will you be giving any suggestions for activities for dementia patients?
Yes, but that really correlates back to the right brain, left brain efficiency, in the sense that you need to know what sort of habits or what sort of lifestyle the person with dementia had, because they still like what they like even though they have dementia. So I can help anybody that has questions with those activities. You definitely never want to insult a person with dementia by giving them a baby game, which is underestimating their intellectuals, so to speak. There are certain things that frustrate people with dementia, so it depends where they're at in their journey relative to the game or the activity that you're going to give them. So I'm very happy to discuss those with you. If I could get a little, few more specifics, you don't have to share now. But Marilyn, I think you're going to put my telephone number or your email. I'm happy to address any of those questions. If I have a little bit more information, I absolutely can recommend the most widely used games and activities.
Yes.
And I just wanted to add, the library is working on developing caregiver kits, and they're specifically designed to help people explore how to better communicate and what kind of activities the person they're caring for would like. So we'll have different themed kits, and every kit will also include a book with information on caregiving for the person checking it out. but those are coming hopefully in the next couple of months, so just keep an eye out in the catalog for those.
Yeah, that'll be great. And just as a little brain quiz for everybody that's watching, what does Gurav Mila Mahagut mean? That's the challenge question of the night. You can go home and think about that and then tell me next week what it means. So I'm expanding your brains tonight by giving you homework to learn something that you don't know. Do we have any other questions?
Any other questions? Anyone? Feel free to put them in chat. I don't see any in the Q&A right now.
Okay, no problem. Well, I would just like to say thank you very much. I hope that this was useful. I hope that everybody had some sort of takeaways. I'm happy to be a resource, as I know you are at the library. And for those listening, as we move through this dementia-friendly Orland Park endeavor, if we have families on that are struggling with the form of dementia, we got your back. We're going to help you through this, and we're going to be here for you, and together we're going to educate. Okay, and education is knowledge, and just know that you're not alone, that we do care, and we are going to help you with anything that we can to make this a little bit easier for you.
And then for anybody who would like to rewatch, or if they would like to direct somebody they know to this presentation, all of Aisling's presentations, she's going to do 6 total for the year, are going to be available on the Orland Park Library's YouTube channel. So if you need a link to those or help finding those, you can email the outreach department, or you can email Mary Lynn directly.
Wonderful.
Okay, I've put my email in the chat box. It's outreach@orlandparklibrary.org, and you can just put it, attention Mary Lynn, and I can send you the handouts that Aishling provided me with, or I can get you in touch with Aishling and send you her contact information. So keep that in mind, and there's no more questions that I can see. So just want to thank you again, Aishling, and this has been wonderful information, very useful, helpful to me, because my mother has Alzheimer's, so it's helped me really think about the brain.
Sure. And as we move through the different presentations, I think the most powerful presentation is the communication one. That is the most important one, I believe, in the whole entire series, because that's what you're left with, is how do you communicate with a loved one who can't answer you back verbally. So we're going to talk about those strategies and body language and all that other good stuff that'll really help you. So I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much. Stay safe, everybody. Stay warm, and we'll talk soon. Thank you so much.
Good
Thank
night.
you. Good night.
Thank you, Aishling. Good night, everyone.